Hello, welcome to Chapter 4 from your Essentials book. This is about nutrition, as you can see from the sheet. We're going to talk about three macronutrients: fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. Again, fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. One thing I want you to do as trainers, you need to emphasize to your clients that they should eat to live, not the other way around. If they live to eat, then the result will be either becoming overweight or obese. So again, make sure that you emphasize they need, for them to have energy, they should eat the right foods, and they should also eat the wrong foods sparingly. Okay, so don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just make sure that they don't eat things that are high in sodium, um, simple sugars, and fats 24/7. Okay. All right. Let's talk about macronutrients. So as you can see from the sheet, macro, M-A-C-R-O, means big. So it makes the definition a little easier to remember. So macronutrients are taken in larger quantities. And the macronutrients that we're concerned with are fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. Fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. Let's go ahead and zoom in on to the fats parts. The fats are needed for endurance activities. Endurance activities include walking, jogging, swimming, running, things that require oxygen. And during aerobic activity, calories from fats are oxidized. In other words, they're burned by oxidative enzymes and they're broken down into fatty acids. Now, when we're talking about um, fats, especially stored fat in our bodies that are known as triglycerides. Again, triglycerides are stored fat. Those are the things that will cause us to become obese and to feel languid and tired as we walk from point A to point Z. Okay, so our goal as trainers is to make sure that people are burning calories from fats so that way they can actually work out the muscle afterwards. Okay. All right. So now the two types of fats we're concerned with are saturated and unsaturated fats. Again, saturated and unsaturated fats. Just to illustrate the point of the difference between saturated and unsaturated, I used a pat of butter and olive oil. So I'm going to bring them down here in your view. Okay. So as you can see, the butter and the olive oil, of course, are different in terms of consistency, but the difference is hydrogen. The thicker an item such as the butter is due to the fact that they have a lot of hydrogen. So if you hear the term hydrogenated fats, that's what's happening. The hydrogen um, counts for the thickness. Whereas when you're talking about something like olive oil has less hydrogen, therefore is liquid at room temperature. So what I want you to remember from saturated fats are thick because of the hydrogen, so therefore they're going to be solid at room temperature. In contrast, oils and fats such as the one that you see with olive oil are liquid at room temperature because they have less hydrogen. Okay? All right, so now let's go back to the carbohydrates for a moment. Carbohydrates are your primary source of energy, especially during activities that involve power, strength, and speed. Power, strength, and speed. So when we're talking about athletes, basketball, hockey, soccer, they need a lot of carbohydrates. So what they do before a big game, meet, or what have you, is they start stocking up on potatoes, grains, what have you, and they make sure all that sits in for 12 hours before the big game. What they're doing is that they're reserving all the energy stores. Okay, so they're going to use them much later on. That's what we call carbohydrate loading. Okay, so just to let you know that. All right, now we're going to talk about three different types of carbohydrates. Three different types of carbohydrates. We have monosaccharides, polysaccharides, and disaccharides. So mono, poly, which is actually the last one, and disaccharides. Let's go over here to the monosaccharides for a moment. Monosaccharides are one sugar compounds, as you can see in the middle part of the sheet. When we break down the term monosaccharides, mono means, of course, one. Saccharide, S-A-C-C-H-A-R, means sugar, and I-D-E means pertaining to. So we combine them all into one term. Monosaccharides are basically one sugar compounds. Now, the one sugar compounds we need to know are, of course, glucose, the one that we definitely know of. Glucose is stored in the muscle and liver for energy. Again, stored in the muscle and liver for energy. Fructose, however, is found in fruit, so like grapes, oranges, kiwi, things like that, they have a lot of fructose. And galactose. Galactose is the last one sugar compound we need to know because that makes up part of what's called milk sugar or lactose. When you hear people being lactose intolerant, chances are they won't be able to take in galactose either. Okay, now disaccharides has to do with a combination of two one sugar compounds together. So, and as you can see from all three of those disaccharides, glucose is the main component of each one. So, two glucose molecules together make up malt sugar or maltose. One glucose compound and one fructose compound would make up sucrose, which is table sugar. And finally, glucose plus galactose would make up that milk sugar called lactose. Okay, I'm going to go back down here again to the table. I'm going to show you the of um, different types of carbohydrates. Now, over here we have grains. Grains, I'm going to ask you a question. Of course, you can't answer through the video, but are grains simple or are they complex? The potato, is the potato complex or is it simple? Okay, if you answer complex for both of them, you're correct. Simple carbohydrates tend to have what's called a high glycemic index. In other words, there's more um, there's more refined sugar content as opposed to raw sugar content. When someone says low glycemic index, it's basically it has more raw sugar content as opposed to refined. So refined is the one that has to do with high glycemic index. Raw sugar has more to that's the natural one. That's has more to do with complex. The complex carbohydrates are the ones that will give us longer lasting energy because they're harder to break down. Whereas simple during exercise, simple carbohydrates tend to break down a whole lot quicker. Therefore, you're going to feel that crash and burn, and that's not what we want. Okay. So going back to the carbohydrates, the monosaccharides are the ones that are going to give us that crash and burn. They're still going to give us energy, but it's going to be not going to be as long lasting as the polysaccharides, which we're going to come up to right now. Oligosaccharides. Oligosaccharides or polysaccharides are known as three or more simple sugars chained together. So remember what I was telling you before about um, complex carbohydrates being harder to will be harder to break down. Polysaccharides are the complex carbohydrates that are harder to break down, and they're broken down into two more components. We have the we have the starches and we have fiber. So again, starches and fiber. Starches are plant carbohydrates found in grains and vegetables. So one example would be the potato, as you just saw before. Now fiber, there are two different types of fiber. There's insoluble and then there's soluble. Insoluble adds bulk to our diet, where soluble, which is broken down, breaks down to remove waste, especially fatty deposits in our blood vessels. So one analogy I can think of is think of a hose with a lot of dirt and gunk inside of it. Would you be able to go ahead and water down the grass with a clogged up hose? Of course not, unless you were to take something and to remove the dirt and the grime um, out of the hose. That's how I want you to think about the blood vessel. If you have something like fiber, you break down that fiber into small components. Those small components of fiber will go ahead and remove the the cholesterol, the low density lipoprotein. That's the bad stuff. If it takes out the LDL cholesterol and the fatty deposits, then the blood will be able to move right through the vessel easily and effectively. Okay. So what I want you to remember about soluble fiber that's beneficial for lowering your LDL cholesterol levels and the risk of developing heart disease. Okay. Okay, now lastly, we're going to talk about protein. Protein is responsible, especially for forming the brain, skin, nails, hormones, muscle, hair, and then enzymes. Okay, so it's really important. Now, especially as gym rats, it's important for muscle, especially to maintain our tone and also to make sure that our bodies don't look bad. Okay, especially with the hair, the nails, and stuff like that. It's just really more for body maintenance. Now, the main component of protein is nitrogen, which is non a metallic chemical element that makes up about 78% of the Earth's atmosphere. And one thing I want you to know is there are 20 amino acids that actually make up protein, build up protein. Okay, now of the 20 amino acids, we have nine essential amino acids. What do you mean by essential? They are actually acquired by consumption of foods. Okay, so one example would be alanine. Alanine is one of those essential amino acids needed to make glucose. Yes, you can use protein to make glucose. And if you don't know this by now, you'll probably hear it later on. We have what's called gluconeogenesis, which is the making of new sugar or new glucose. And but it's simpler to remember it as the alanine glucose cycle. Okay, so what's happening here is glucose, of course, is actually being used. It's taken out of the liver. It's taken out of the liver because the body's going to need glucose for their energy. And now, what's happening is as the person is using that glucose is going to be broken down further and further into pyruvic acid, and then after pyruvic acid becomes lactic acid. Then the same lactic acid now, here's the kicker, the same lactic acid is going to go right back to the liver and it's going to be manufactured as as glucose again by using alanine. Okay, so alanine does have a very strong role in this process. Now, non-essential, non-essential. There are 11 of them. Okay, non-essential amino acids are manufactured by the body, and one of them, for an example, is tryptophan. Tryptophan is actually an amino acid needed to make serotonin. Serotonin is a hormone that's actually secreted um, by the parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. In other words, this hormone helps us to relax. So let's say, for example, you had a really big barbecue dinner and you feel like you're about to go ahead and pass out and sleep. Well, guess what? This hormone is actually responsible for you feeling languid and well fed and stuff like that. But thank tryptophan for that too. Okay. All right. So that's in a nutshell. Now let me go ahead and bring you to the protein part. Now beans. Okay. Now I know you probably were expecting a steak dinner, right? Okay. Beans make up what are called incomplete protein. Incomplete protein. What do we mean by that? Incomplete proteins are proteins that do not have all the amino acids that are needed. Okay, as a in contrast to the meats um, like steaks, um, pork chops, things of that matter. So we're talking about grains. We're talking about beans eggs, milk, they are incomplete proteins. Whereas we're talking about complete proteins, we're talking about foods that actually have all the amino acids, all the essential amino acids. All right. All right. So now that's nutrition in a nutshell. So later on, I'm going to talk a little bit about vitamins and minerals and also eating disorders. So hopefully this helped you, and we'll take it from there. And I look forward to talking to you about the second part of nutrition.